Okay, well, here we are live on the air, so to speak. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jeff Kruken. I'm Vice President for Business Growth at Orbital Transports Incorporated. And with me, we have David Hurst, who is the CEO and founder of Orbital Transports. This is the first of three webinars focused on handling the challenges of satellite missions. Today, we're going to discuss how to minimize your costs and we're going to have two other webinars following this one. The second one will be on Thursday, November 16th at the same time, and that will be focused on identifying and mitigating risks. The third will be on Thursday, December 7th, again at the same time, and that will focus on shortening mission timelines for satellite missions. All of this, all three of these webinars will be emphasizing supply chain services, managed supply chain services, to help address the three issues I just described. Last thing I'll say before we really dive into this is please write your questions in the text box. If we don't address them all during the live session here, we are going to distribute a link to this webinar, as well as the Q&A to everyone who is registered. And again, thank you for being here. So let's go ahead and get started. Dave, did you want to start out by providing a brief introduction to Orbital Transports, and then we can go to through the questions that I have for you as the interviewer?
Okay, very good. So hi, everybody. I'm Dave Hurst, CEO of Orbital Transports. And just a little background about the company. Orbital Transports is a space logistics company currently focused on delivering small satellite missions from initial concept all the way through to completed mission. We provide comprehensive satellite missions, and we provide, comprehensive mission services, starting from the initial mission analysis, planning, and architecture, all the way through deployment of payloads on hosted satellites, rideshare satellites, and even deployment of payloads into constellations. We also provide end-to-end space logistics, which means we coordinate the complex elements of spacecraft facilities, people, products, and services in order to deliver a mission. And I think today we're going to be discussing some of the interesting aspects of the supply chain management.
All right, very good. So thanks for that overview of Orbital Transports. So let me proceed with the first question that I have for you. When you established Orbital Transports in 2019, I believe, help us understand why you did. Were you looking to change how the satellite industry traditionally works?
I wasn't actually originally planning to change the way the satellite industry works, but I saw an interesting opportunity in the mid-90s, in the mid-2010s. There was a rapid expansion in the small satellite industry, and there were a number of reasons for that. Small satellites are more affordable. The technology was developing rapidly. They can be launched quickly and affordably, and that enabled a rapid cycle time in technology. And so the technology was advancing very rapidly. And I saw that there was an opportunity for people to have access to space. And the traditional approach is that you have to build your own spacecraft from scratch, starting basically from a blank sheet of paper. But as the technology was advancing, it was becoming much easier to design and develop small satellites. And there were a lot of companies who were developing products for small satellites. And so it was coming to a point where there was really a lot of off-the-shelf products that were available. And I saw an opportunity to help people get into space who really may not have thought of space as being something that was useful for them, even if it could be. And so Orbital Transports was started to really fill that gap and help people who have an interest in harnessing value from space or space data, but maybe building spacecraft and operating space missions was not their primary focus. So we could offer them mission outsourcing services, get them into space, and they could focus on their primary business objectives, whatever that was.
So as you thought about how you wanted to develop the services that Orbital Transports is going to bring to the satellite markets, the satellite business, the business of configuring, buying, and launching satellites, what would be an example or a couple of examples, if you want, a little bit more specific about problems that you're seeing, right, in terms of the traditional approach to fulfilling, supply chain components and subsystems and so forth. What is an example, as I said, or one or two examples, and then the traditional solution that, from your perspective, just really isn't suitable anymore when it comes to satellite supply chain?
I think the first issue is that people don't really realize how accessible space can be. They think about going to space and it's this vast problem, and I don't know how to even begin. And that's not really the case, but it helps if you have somebody who's familiar, who's an expert in the industry, who can help you along. And so that was sort of the genesis of the mission outsourcing services. But as we got into it and we started developing our network of partner companies that we work with, we realized that there was an opportunity to build out a supply chain. And there were just more and more manufacturers who were building subsystems and components and different elements that go into a small satellite. If you are a small company, you want to get into space, you're faced with a tremendous uphill battle just in terms of finding out what products are available. How can you find what are the different things that go into a spacecraft? What do you even need to do in order to build a spacecraft? Orbital Transports has developed that network of partners and relationships, and so we found that basically providing a virtual supply chain for companies was an excellent solution. So a satellite manufacturer that uses its own people to find and contract with vendors has a very time-consuming, expensive, and daunting task. But if you can outsource that to somebody like Orbital Transports, then you can dramatically reduce the amount of time and the costs that you spend searching the industry to find the products that you need specifically.
So, and I, as I listen to you, and I'm thinking about just, how dramatically just in the last 5 or 6 years, we've seen just explosive growth in the number of startups focused on satellites, and who are manufacturing different components, different subsystems, and of course, various kinds of software as well to operate on board satellites. And maybe 5 or 6 years ago, that was primarily, if not almost exclusively, U.S.-based startups. But now we're seeing startups in many countries in Europe, in Africa, and the Indo-Pacific region. So, is this a global reach that Orbital Transports has with its partner network? Talk about that a little bit.
Sure. The small satellite industry is definitely a global industry. There are certainly numerous companies in the U.S. and in Europe, but we are seeing more companies in Asia, Australia, Africa, South America, and we've developed partners really in every single continent on the planet except Antarctica. And many of those people are developing solutions that are unique and provide significant value for certain challenges that people may have. And so by building our network in a global fashion, we can bring those solutions to people and make them available where they might not otherwise have been available. And just think about the challenge of, I need a high resolution hyperspectral imager, and finding somebody who manufactures that. Well, it turns out we have suppliers from South Africa and Australia who provide exactly those capabilities. But if you're a startup in the U.S., it'll take you a long time to find those guys and figure out if that's the right solution or not.
Well, so that's interesting. That brings to mind sort of a perspective or an image, thinking back to the more traditional model of building satellites, which, for decades, of course, was a geosynchronous orbit. And, there were a handful of companies and a handful of suppliers. So that traditional approach that, you mentioned, where basically you'd have people within a company doing the work to find vendors. So in this new environment that we have with so many new companies manufacturing satellites and then vendors of components and subsystems all around the world, as you just said, what's the impact of the old approach? And I mean, what is the negative impact or the problematic result of the old approach? It just doesn't work as well. What are some examples of that?
Well, it's very heavyweight, it's expensive, and it takes a long time. There is a significant difference between building geosynchronous satellites that are designed to operate for 10, 15, sometimes even 20 years. Those spacecraft spend years and years in development. And at some point, the technology that will be used in that spacecraft has to be frozen. But development continues. And so the technology will advance, but the technology that was selected for that particular mission doesn't advance. And by the time it gets into orbit, it's basically obsolete, given the pace at which technology advances. And then over the lifetime of that spacecraft, the technology just gets older and older. And as the new technology advances, new capabilities are being developed that would far outpace that old spacecraft. With small satellites, frequently they're being deployed into low Earth orbit rather than geosynchronous orbit. It's a lot easier to get to low Earth orbit. We see a lot more spacecraft being deployed into large constellations. And it's much easier to design a spacecraft with today's technology, launch it next year, run it for 3 to 5 years, and then replace it in that time frame. In that 3 to 5 years, you'll probably see 2 or even 3 generations of technology that you can put into the replacement spacecraft. So really, the cycle times are so much faster, and that supercharges the technology development life cycle. And so we're seeing just really a lot of advance in space technology that wasn't happening for such a long time.
No, I think that's a good point, and brings to mind you were talking about how every couple of years you're going to have newer technology being manifested in these small sats going into low Earth orbit, more frequent launches. Especially if you think about one of the demand signals that's coming into the market is from the United States Space Force and its procurement agency, Space Development Agency, the proliferated warfighter space architecture. The tranches are basically every 2 years, right? So that's driving technology development. What it's also doing is it's a demand indicator that gives entrepreneurs reasons to start companies to build new technologies for small sats, and that just makes the whole supply chain larger, more unwieldy and cumbersome if you have to do it yourself.
Right. Well, and think about the impact of that. So most companies in the space industry today, and particularly for small satellites, are small companies, many with less than 10 employees. And so that workload ramps up for people who are already wearing multiple hats. In fact, we had one company tell us that one of their engineers was spending 40% of her time researching the market and contacting vendors. That's a huge productivity hit. I mean, just imagine 40% of one person's time in a 10-person company. That's a huge fraction of the overall effort. Take that productivity hit and multiply it across hundreds of companies in the supply chain and all of their engineers and so forth. And the end result is just the timelines get stretched to the right, operating costs increase, missions get delayed and your customers get very unhappy and may not come back. So that's I think the challenges that people are seeing.
Well, so that was a pretty bad list of challenges and problems. So, all right, so that's got to be creating a fair amount of suffering. How is that spread around the ecosystem? That Orbital Transports operates within. Who is actually suffering from the failure of the traditional supply chain, just not being able to accommodate this variety of vendors and the demand?
Well, I think it's the companies, it's their customers, and even it's the suppliers, because with the massive increase in products and services that are being created for the small sat industry, those companies need customers. They need to find customers. But there's a couple of different ways to look at this. So think about that engineer. Why did she become an engineer? She loves designing and building things. Do you think she really wants to spend 40% of her time doing vendor research? I mean, seriously. So let's pull back a little bit and take a somewhat broader view. I have another slide I'd like to show here, which shows what we call the supply chain pyramid. We're actually under this slide. The supply chain pyramid basically describes a number of successive tiers, where each tier incorporates products from the tier below it and provides products of increasing complexity and sophistication to the tier above it. So, and as you see depicted here, tier 1 consists of complete satellite systems and platforms. Tier 2 consists of the subsystems like attitude, determination, and control systems, command and data handling, power, propulsion, and so forth. Tier 3 consists of the assemblies, such as computers, batteries, antennas, star trackers, heat pipes. And Tier 4 consists of lower level components and parts like amplifiers, optical encoders, solar cells, and so forth. And then at the bottom is Tier 5, which consists of hardware and materials like ball bearings, screws, gaskets, and aluminum, and what have you. So at the very top of the supply chain pyramid, these products provide the most value to the end user. And then at each tier, products are built from the products in the tier below it. And as you go deeper, the value to the end user is more indirect, and the products tend to become more generalized. So you'll find at the lower levels that customers for suppliers at those levels are actually much broader than small sats. They may be supplying to other spacecraft. They may be supplying to completely different industries. But all of it funnels toward the top and the development of that spacecraft. So you'll see that every company in the supply chain pyramid suffers from the challenges that we've been discussing. Just imagine the number of companies represented by the supply chain pyramid that we're looking at. And if you take the whole find a vendor and purchase decision process, it's going to crumble under the weight of what that young engineer has to do, multiplied across the entire customer, operator, manufacturer, supplier, supply chain. And everybody is feeling that pain.
No, I think that pyramid, it's a great visual aid for what you're saying, Dave, and especially as you get further down, closer to the base, there's more and more suppliers, more and more vendors there. And so, as you said, the pain gets spread around. So, well, I mean, what's a better way to handle this supply chain complexity? How does Orbital Transports suggest fixing this?
So one of the movements we see in the small sat industry is toward vertical integration, where companies want to be in control of all of the things that go into building their spacecraft. And that means that they either own or manufacture those parts themselves, which you can understand that gives them the sense of control, but it also is very cumbersome, because then there's a huge sunk investment into that infrastructure. And if changes happen, and as we've been talking about, technology advances, you have to retool. That is, a massive expense beyond that. So from our perspective, the solution is essentially a managed supply chain service. It allows you to outsource your supply chain needs and have the benefits of a vertically integrated supply chain without having to own the supply chain infrastructure yourself. And it also allows you to have rapid agility. So let's talk about some of these things in a little more detail. So this starts essentially with the SmallSat catalog, which is, as I mentioned before, a curated portal of products and services for the SmallSat industry. It's intended to be your one-stop shop for all of your mission needs. But more than just a collection of products and services, through the SmallSat catalog, Orbital Transports is able to offer integrated supply chain management services. And so customers need not be beholden to a specific product line, and they have access to a wide variety of solutions. And in fact, our knowledge and expertise about all of those solutions. So that young engineer who's spending 40% of her time just looking for products can come to Orbital Transports and say, here are my requirements, what do you got? And we can help her find the appropriate solutions. And then if there's a change in requirements or something, we can be very responsive to those changes in requirements. So agile companies need a supply chain source that's flexible and responsive to that kind of rapid change. When critical requirements and specifications, statements of work, bills of material change, with our knowledge of the SmallSat industry and all of our relationships with the companies in the industry, we can quickly identify and propose appropriate alternatives. And that's a huge time savings. That young engineer can go back to designing and building things. In addition to that, a significant concern for supply chains is assuring supplier certifications and assessing product quality. Is the supplier following ISO 9000 quality management principles? Are they ISO 9001 certified? Have the products been subjected to qualification and acceptance testing? Do they meet the GEV 7000 standard for environmental verification? Again, researching those questions takes time away from building solutions. And Orbital Transports tracks all of this information on all of the products in the SmallSat catalog. And so again, that's a huge time savings because we've already done the work for you. Another concern is supply chain transparency. What are the lead times for product manufacturing and delivery? What are the actual product costs, not just for manufacturing, but also for shipping, handling, taxes, import duties, other regulatory requirements? Because we maintain close relationships with our partners and we track all of this data, we can provide our customers with that latest up-to-date information. And again, it's a huge time saving. If you don't have to do that, we do it for you. As we were discussing before, the SmallSat industry has truly become a global industry with manufacturers in the US, Europe, Africa, Asia, and elsewhere. Companies who rely on international supply chains have to deal with shipping across international borders and a host of import-export concerns. Do you need an export license for that product? Do you have to worry about ITAR concerns? What is the EAR code for that particular product? That's a huge waste of time to figure out on your own. Orbital Transports handles these issues and can make sure that your international shipments comply with the necessary export licensing and import duties and so forth. And then one of the hardest aspects in managing your own supply chain is maintaining the delivery schedule, monitoring the real status of your product orders, and assuring that they will be delivered on time. Our partner relationships enable us to monitor production schedules, coordinate supplier deliveries, and keep our customers apprised of order status. We'll know when there will be delays in production and can inform you at the earliest opportunity. We handle shipping logistics as well, so we can ensure that the products are delivered to your doorstep on time. So that's a quick summary of our managed supply chain services and how that can really cut delivery times, mission delivery times.
No, thank you for running through that. I mean, that is a pretty extensive collection of services making up the whole Orbital Transport's managed supply chain services portfolio. So, thinking of all these, not so much individually as you described them, but as a set of services combined together for a customer, how would you describe the benefits of taking an approach like this, of having Orbital Transports handle and manage supply chain services for a customer?
Reduce time to mission delivery, reduce your costs for mission delivery. I mean, the benefits are enormous. If you need to make changes, we can rapidly figure out what is an appropriate alternative and get the solutions to you quickly. So I think the benefits are quite significant.
Yeah, I would add to that a non-engineering term, which will say the happiness ratio probably increases, especially for that young engineer who was spending 40% of her time. And there's certainly been enough studies to indicate that happy employees are more productive employees. And, given the pressure of time, the pressure of costs, to produce X, Y, or Z, anything that increases the productivity of employees certainly is a benefit. So all right, so good. So we've run through, what the traditional model has looked like for decades, how it came into existence, how we've been as an industry, and I'll say even more broadly as an overall ecosystem, how we have evolved to a more complex and yes, a more cumbersome supply chain because there's so many more suppliers and because it is global now and perhaps in countries that you might not think would be where a manufacturer of components and subsystems and buses would be located. So let me ask you, we're coming up on 30 minutes. Let me ask you, I guess, a closing question, and of course, this is a lead into the next two webinars that I mentioned. So we've been focused on minimizing costs here of the whole supply chain process. Our next webinar on November 16th is going to focus on identifying and mitigating risks, and then the one after that on December 7th on shortening mission timelines. So here's an opportunity, Dave, if you want to sort of put a teaser out there and about what the next webinar will be as we talk about cutting risks and identifying and mitigating risks.
Yeah, so I think we'll talk about this in more detail, but managed supply chain services have a significant effect on reducing your risk in several different aspects, and certainly also can reduce mission delivery times.
All right, very good. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Certainly, Dave, thank you as well for walking us through there. So I want to ask you, as we're closing out, you probably have some closing remarks, and also I know we've got a slide with contact information as well. So don't want to forget to put that up there as well. So again, thank you, David. Thank you, everyone who's been joining us. I'll let you close out this webinar with whatever final thoughts you might have. And we'll look forward to seeing our viewers on November 16th.
I'd like to thank everyone for this opportunity to discuss supply chain management for the small-sat industry and manage supply chain services from Orbital Transports. I hope you found it useful. If you'd like to know more about the small-sat catalog or Orbital Transport small-sat mission and supply chain services, or even interested in joining our partner network and becoming one of our suppliers, please contact me. If you'd like to join our mailing list, you can send an email to info@orbitaltransports.com. And thanks for dropping by today.
All right, very good.